All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Peterson, and we would like to thank you for joining us today for NAGDCA's second webinar of 2019. Our topic today is data-driven communication strategy. I'm excited to introduce presenter Jeff Hutson, the Chief Communications Officer of the Indiana Public Retirement System, who will share an overview of his organization's strategies for incorporating research and data into each step of the communications process. First, a little about Jeff. He's responsible for retirement financial education, counseling, communication, and voice of the customer research. Through INPERS, he has worked with both defined benefit and defined contribution plans, ranging in size from 200 participants to more than 200,000, and assets of $1 million to more than $12 billion, so a very wide range. His team has received national recognition for innovative retirement education and marketing communications programs. Jeff holds a bachelor's from Butler University's Lacey School of Business and a master's degree in public relations from Ball State University. He has served Indiana's pension system since 2006, and his 3 decades of experience include marketing and benefits, communications, and health education initiatives for consultants and private sector firms in retirement services, manufacturing, healthcare, and retail. We're very excited to have him today. Before we get started, with the presentation, we want to let you know about a few housekeeping items. First, please remain muted with your video turned off throughout the call so the presentation isn't interrupted. We've designated time at the end of the presentation for a question and answer period. And throughout the webinar, you may submit questions anytime you want using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be only visible to staff, and we'll answer as many of them as we can at the end. We are recording this presentation, and we'll post it to the webinar archive on the website for you and other members who may not have been able to make it today to refer to as needed. With that, I'd like to present Jeff. Jeff, take it away.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to actually talk to this group. So good morning to you if you're on the West Coast, and good afternoon to the rest of you. So I'll talk to you about a few things today, but a few things about how I'm oriented. I tend to be a data guy, which is not always common in communication, but I'm a communicator and I'm a data-driven guy. I'm a process guy. So one of our friends here, Albert Einstein, tells us if I had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. I think to some extent, solving communication problems can be the same thing. Now, one of the things I'm here to talk about today is why would we even have data-driven communication? And the sense is that this could solve problems for you if you've had some frustration with getting actual measured results or getting people to actually change their behavior. There's a chance that the kind of data-driven communication I'm going to talk about will be useful to you. So what we'll do today, what we'll explore is first off a standard research process, and we're going to talk about why do we even bother to research. Second, we're going to talk about a standard communication process to say how do I approach and how do many people in the world approach putting together a communication program. Then we say how do we marry those two things together. We'll give you a case study, and then we're going to talk about no and low cost methods that you can do this, so you don't have to have a large budget and big staff to get this done. So first, a little test. This falls under the category of how do you know? And this has been, unfortunately, a question I've been asking since I was in grade school and high school, which didn't always endear me to teachers. But the question is, how do you know? And basically, how do you come to believe in something? And in this case, you're going to see an example of a checkerboard here, and you're going to see a square that's A and a square that's B. And anybody with any intuition could look at that and say, well, square A is definitely darker than square B. But the reason we research is because we want to know, is what we believe and what we see actually true? And surprisingly, the answer in this case is that square A and square B are actually exactly the same color. Now, lest you think I'm trying to pull a trick on you and I've doctored this slide, I haven't, but I'm a skeptical enough guy that when I first saw this, I loaded those images into Photoshop and took samples of both the A and the B to prove to myself that they were in fact the same color, and much to my surprise, they actually were. So it's not a hoax. It's something to say that in research, we have to understand sometimes what we dearly hold in our belief systems or that we have actually seen to be true maybe has an alternative explanation. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's first talk about that big word called epistemology. And that's basically saying, how do we know things? And I'm going to talk about some 5 basic ways of knowing. First off is authority. If you're an authority on something, or if you're the boss, you are the authority, you can declare, here's what the truth is. There are times when I interact with my staff that I'll make statements that I believe to be true, and then I realize I see some skepticism on people's faces, and I have to give them permission to question that. Just because I'm in authority doesn't mean that I'm always right. So there's that issue of authority. Then there's the issue of intelligence. And there are many intelligent people in the world. I've worked with physicians, I've worked with attorneys, I've worked with engineers, and they seem to be some of the most intelligent people that I've met. But I would say that as intelligent as an attorney may be, nobody would want them to go into the operating room and using their ability to figure things out do open heart surgery. And at the same time, the open heart surgeon, you wouldn't necessarily say, hey, I'm going through a complex legal matter. I know you're a smart guy. Can you help me out? So intelligence will help you, but it will take you only so far. Then there's intuition. Now, intuition is something that I have learned the hard way in my family life, listening to my wife, is sometimes she has very good intuition. I need to listen to it. But intuition is something that you need to be careful with. It's very often based on your interactions with the world around you, but it's also limited by the interactions you've had in the world around you and your life's experiences. So intuition is an important thing, but you need to ask yourself, why is my gut feeling what my gut feeling is? Then you have observation, and that's saying I've actually observed some behavior or I've seen something happen. This could be in market research. This could be somebody who is walking through a grocery store watching how people are interacting with products. This could be the undercover boss. This could be you and observing how your participants behave or react to something. And then finally, there's measurement. Can we measure these things? And very often we have really good data on what participants are doing in our systems, but we don't necessarily know why they're doing it. So one of the things I'm going to talk about today is measurement that measures people's attitudes, opinions, and behaviors in addition to the really good data that many of your systems already have. Now, what you will notice is that I occasionally switch back and forth from the word participant to member. And in the Indiana Fund, we call them members, but in many of your worlds, they're participants, so I'll switch back and forth, and just forgive me for that. So one of the things we have to know is that we're managing risk when we do research. Very often, if you see this box in the upper right corner is the word intuition, and that's based on our experience, and then how do we explain what we just saw? And how do we explain how the world is working? And very often that intuition is something very important to do or to understand in research, but it's not the end of research. Just as the research we showed a minute ago saying square A and square B are the same color, sometimes things are not what they appear. So we do research, and that's where we may do focus groups to get some greater understanding, but we also do a lot of quantitative research, opinion research. And we take that research and we use that to test our intuitions to say, how do we know we're right? And by the way, what are the consequences if we're wrong? And that's how we measure and mitigate that risk of spending a lot of money on a communication campaign when it turns out that we were wrong in our assumptions and therefore didn't get the results we needed. So you'll look here and you'll see that some of the key factors involved in this process are intuition and observation, and then coming up with an explanation for it through research. Now, let's shift gears here for a minute and put the research hat down and put on your communicator hat. And let's talk about a 4-stage process for communication. You'll hear that often referred to as RPIE. A lot of people also call it RPI. So if you hear these things in a meeting, this is what's being talked about. And basically that says, how do we develop a communications plan and how do we deploy it? And the 4 steps are basically researching, planning, initiating, and evaluating. And very often the struggle in communication plans is that we often go We skip the research phase, we go plan, and then we initiate it, and then when we evaluate, we're not happy with the results. So let's talk about how we do that planning and how do we then ultimately incorporate it with research. So first off, the research phase is that part where we say, what is the problem? What's the opportunity? What's the description of what we want? What is the issue that we have with participants and their behavior? Is it something that we're doing in terms of behavioral education, financial education, retirement readiness education that we would like them to do or respond to or understand? And so we say, what is that problem? How do we know it's a problem? And again, that's how do you know question. How did we identify it? For instance, you may say we're responding to members because we're launching a campaign because we've got a lot of phone calls in our call center on an issue. Well, the important question to ask is, well, how many phone calls did you get? If you're the person answering the phone and you get a lot of phone calls in a 5, 10, 15, 20-minute period, then that's going to feel like a lot of phone calls to you. But if the phone calls end after that, maybe quantitatively it's not as big an issue as you think. So how do we identify the problem? And more importantly also is, who is the audience? Who are we actually talking to? If you say I'm talking to participants, I'm going to say that audience is way too general. Your audience is a human being. Your audience has hopes and aspirations in life. They're at an age or an age range in life. They're in a generation. They have savings habits and money habits. And so understanding who that audience is beyond just saying they're a participant and perhaps a government employee, that richness is going to be very important in terms of your ability to reach people. And then ultimately, what do you want to have happen with that audience? What do you want the audience to do? What behavior change do you want? So you're going to say, what is the outcome I'm seeking? And you're going to hear me use the words outcome, and you're going to hear me use the words output. Output is that stuff that you send out the door. It's the email, it's the communication tools that you're hoping will result in an outcome. And so you need to begin not by saying, well, hey, let's send out a bunch of newsletters and videos, but actually reel it back and say, who are we talking to before anything else? What action do we want them to do? What step do we want them to take? And maybe there's multiple steps between that first step they take and the ultimate result that you want for them. And you need to understand that. So what's the action you desire? And from that participant perspective, just because you want them to do something doesn't mean they want to do it. So those of you who've studied, and I think quite a few people have now, the whole concept of behavioral science, we'll understand that it's more than just what we want folks to do, and it's more than just logic. They're going to ask, so what, and what's in it for me? So you need to ask that question first. What would motivate somebody to take action? And motivating somebody to take action on some event that's going to take place 30 or 40 years in the future, something called retirement, is often difficult. But understanding what you want them to do, then never forget you need a call for action in your plan. What do I want folks to do, and how am I going to ask them to do it? What first step do I want them to take? And in this plan, you also want to plan to measure your results. What would those outputs look like, and what would those outcomes look like? What communication tools then are you going to use now that you've identified the audience, the demographics, and what tools may be best to reach them? So let's talk about that initiation phase. That's the do it phase. And it's more than just sending things out the door. It is the output stage, but we can't lose focus on the outcomes. Even in this stage, we need to make sure that we're always focused on outcomes. But this is the logistics part that says, what are we going to send out the door, whether it's emails or videos, or whether it's going to be workshops or anything else we're going to do for communication? What are the logistics? What are the timing? The what, when, where, and how? And that can be the complexity stage, but again, if you've done the other steps before this, this becomes a little bit more intuitive. But finally, you need to have the evaluation phase. And again, this is very often where we don't do a good job of evaluating because we don't know what we wanted to have happen in the first place, or the communication methods and tools and messages we used didn't reinforce ultimately the behavior we wanted to see changed. So be prepared to adjust the plan as you need to also. If you're monitoring from the moment you begin a communication campaign through the campaign, then you are more than likely going to find some cases where you're going to correct your course, and you're going to find some reactions you didn't anticipate, and you can refine your campaign as you roll it out. So follow a planned approach for measuring your outputs and your outcomes. Plan how you're going to measure both. Report progress towards achieving each as you go along, and use both leading indicators, those things that are happening today, and tracking those lagging indicators, which are the things that are the ultimate results that you expect. So let's talk about a case study. This may not be the best case study, may not be the worst, but it is a case study for how we use this approach at the Indiana Public Retirement System when dealing with an issue a few years ago regarding investments. Historically, the Indiana Public Retirement System offered self-directed investment options for members that defaulted into something called the guaranteed fund. And let's face it, who wouldn't want to guarantee? And that guaranteed fund actually did pretty well in the sense that the Board of Trustees each year would set the rate for the guaranteed fund, and we would communicate that to our members or our participants. And early on, you could see in 2005, 2006, 2007, that return rate was set in the sixes. Now, you'll also see that the return rate was set in the sixes when 2008, 2009 came around. So the approach of saying the board is going to set a rate was looked at very closely, particularly when we merged the Teachers Retirement Fund and the Public Employees Retirement Fund in 2010. And the new Board of Trustees looked at that and said, you know what, this is not sustainable for the good of the pension or its members, and began to move that guaranteed fund to a market rate. But a generation of folks have been defaulted into that guaranteed fund, put the money in there, and never worried about it. So clearly you can see there that the rate then went down to 0.28%. I won't go into the methodology they used to set that rate, but it was more of a market-based approach. So the question that we asked ourselves and our Board of Trustees asked us is, well, why aren't members moving from the guaranteed fund with such a low return? And isn't that a real risk for them in terms of their future retirement? Now, keep in mind at that point, these defined contribution funds were part of an overall hybrid pension plan, so they had a little bit less future risk in some ways because they were going to earn a pension as well. But some of our explanations, and this is that intuition side of the cycle that I showed you, and perhaps some authority to it and some intelligence, was that, you know, it's probably inertia. They're defaulted there and they just haven't been motivated to move. Secondly, maybe it's awareness. They just don't know where they're invested and they're not paying attention. And then thirdly, maybe they're just disengaged, which is kind of related to that inertia and saying, I just really don't care what's going on here. I've got other bigger issues in life. So the idea that we asked ourselves, if we could move them into target date funds, would they notice or care? But the risk would be, what if none of the things we know above in terms of inertia, awareness, and disengagement are actually the truth, and they were to move into target date funds? What would happen, or if we got rid of the guaranteed fund? So we said, let's ask that question rather than assuming that we were right. And we had pretty good reason to believe we were right because we had a lot of experience in this world and thought that we were right. But we decided to go out to our members and ask them, why are you in the guaranteed fund, or do you even know? So we asked our members, do you even know that there's more than one place where you can invest your money? We asked them if in the last 2 years, have they reviewed their investment options? Have they made changes to the way their funds were invested? Did they intentionally decide not to make any changes? And if they did make changes, or even if they didn't, were they satisfied with the options that they had available for them? So this, by the way, is part of a decision model that you can use in marketing that understands the process that people move to from awareness to familiarity, to making a decision, to utilizing something, and then to advocate or to be happy with the changes they made. And we'll go into more detail on that perhaps in another session, but for today, let's focus on what we learned. And what we learned was that we were half wrong. Now, the good news isn't that we were half right, and that always feels good, but we were half wrong. And our risk was that 55% of those folks who were in the guaranteed fund, and even those who weren't, had made an intentional investment decision. But 43 of those said, I intentionally did not make a decision or make a change. What that means is I know I'm in the guaranteed fund and I don't want to move. So what did that mean to us? That meant up to 50,000 participants were aware of where their money was invested and didn't want to change. Well, that uncovers a risk for us of understanding if we know where the concerns are. As a public retirement system, if you have 50,000 participants who are likely to be quite angry with you if you make a change, it gets your attention. So what we did is we said, okay, there's some short-term and long-term, and we had found in talking to members and doing focus groups also that there was a lot of fear and uncertainty associated with their decisions, a lot of loss aversion, that they want to preserve their money in the wake of this great recession that we had. They trusted in that name guaranteed fund, and who wouldn't trust in a guarantee? Then social norms. Everybody they knew was in the guaranteed fund. Why would they want to change? But we rolled out an education campaign that tried to respect those emotions behind their behavior and not overly rely on just pure logic to get them to make a choice. So I will show you here that this tracks the progress of the percentage of members. These are members, not dollars, who had money in this guaranteed fund. And you can see that from the time we started looking at this in 2013 until 2016, it decreased considerably. Now, what I want to tell you is communication was not the only reason that happened. Communication is not magic, and it's very seldom magic. It's not necessarily going to be the thing that always turns things around for you. Quick fixes aren't normal in communication or marketing, but if you integrate your plans with operational decisions, it can be very effective. So our target date funds had become the default for new participants in the plan. So clearly that means that retiring members who were in the guaranteed fund were at least numerically replaced by members who were in the target date funds. So as I said, we also rolled out education respecting emotions as part of a multi-year effort. And then ultimately the guaranteed fund was replaced by the stable value fund option at the end of 2016. Now, we still have an issue that we still have a lot of people in that stable value fund, and it's not an easy issue to get people to continue to move. But this is an example anyway of how we work together both operationally with operational and board decisions and with education to try and make a difference and use research to understand the mindset, the psychographics, if you may, of our membership. So can you do this yourself? And the answer is yes, maybe. But I would draw your attention to the picture there and the caution that having access to scissors won't make you a better barber, and access to surveying tools can have results that are just as interesting as perhaps that haircut we see in the photo. So I would say a word of caution on the tools. Be diligent and careful when you use them, but you can do it if you keep it simple. Online surveying can be relatively inexpensive. There's low or no cost versions of things. I would say discover and learn what a Likert scale is and how to use a Likert scale. And again, that could be a whole nother session. But those are scales that you would use in research to allow members to rate. And you all have seen a 5-point scale, for instance, with the top 2 ratings, middle ratings, and bottom 2 ratings. Also, we have to talk about secondary research. If you don't have the time, the money, or the wherewithal to do your own opinion research with your membership, understand that there's some great secondary research out there that you can look at that's both opinion research and data research. NAGDCA I could put at the top of the list. In fact, I was just out there yesterday looking at data that makes a difference to me on how I connect with employees, connect with members, connect with participants. The Employee Benefit Research Institute, many of you are familiar with, and they have some very good national surveys there that you can look at and ask, do these apply to my participants? DCIIA, Retirement Research Center, has some good information and are actually increasing what they're doing in terms of participant research. And many of you are familiar with the Boston College Center for Retirement Research. And I know there's many, many other sources of this information, but very often that free information, free access information can be great stuff to use. Use it with a caution, understanding that what is true of a national audience may not be true of your group of participants that are unique to your plan in terms of their age, their demographics, their education, and their outlook on life. So, can you do it cost effectively? The other thing I'd encourage you to do is partner with your record keeper. their communicators are very often familiar with the four-step process, and even if they don't put words on the four-step process, very often you'll find that that's the process that they follow, that they want to understand first, understand your audiences first, and then develop a plan that will help you reach your audience, reach your participants. So they should be able to help you also take their library of material and tailor it to your unique set of participants. They may also have some in-house survey expertise, and my experience with record keepers is they tend to almost always be very eager to be very helpful. So you've got a budget. Maybe you have a budget, you can spend some money, and you say, maybe I want to hire a consultant or get some help. First thing I would say is network with your fellow NAGDCA members and find out who are they using, who are they interacting with, who can do this job. I would also encourage you to tap into your local university. Tap into student-led opportunities, because I've been adjunct faculty, but I've also been a student. And in both cases, I've had a great opportunity to learn things, and I've never seen a more motivated, more intelligent group of folks than students who are juniors and seniors or in their master's degree programs, who are learning to research and saying, I really think I could do a good job for you on this. And you'll find a great deal of talent with a high degree of motivation. Other sources, if you say, I want to find somebody who can do research for me, the Insights Association, which just happens to be a group I belong to, keeps a list of professional researchers around the country that you can tap into. The International Association of Business Communicators, and that's a group that is, as it says, business communicators. They're all over the country. They have local chapters in many areas, and you may be able to tap into people who are members of that organization. Also, the Public Relations Society of America. Now, if you are interested in finding somebody who's credentialed, and I'm a person who strongly believes in credentials, but I also strongly believe in experience. So I'm not a person who says if you're not carrying initials after your name, you can't do the job, because I believe you can. But if you're looking for someone who has a good housekeeping seal of approval, you might look for an ABC. That's an accredited business communicator through the IABC program. You might look for the newer CMPs. Those are communication management professionals. APRs are people who are accredited in public relations. And in research, professional research certification is something that you'll find is a pretty rigorous program that people go through to demonstrate their research skills. These are all hyperlinked for you so that when you have a copy of this presentation later, you can go out and look. So that brings me back to, if I had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes to finding the problem and 5 minutes to finding the solution. So I've given you probably about 25 minutes of information here, and would be happy to answer questions. If we can't get to all the questions, feel free to email me also. My email is up on the screen.
All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions so far, so I will get to a few things, and if anything comes up, please, your opportunity is now if you want to ask Jeff something. Jeff, thank you so much for the presentation today. That was fantastic. We have a few final notes. First, we want to thank all of you for your attendance today, and we value your feedback. We'll be sending out a short survey that we hope you'll complete. Our goal with these webinars, of course, is to deliver information that's useful to you, and we can't do that without your input. So please let us know what you thought and what you'd like to see in the future. Second, I want to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be opening our annual benchmarking survey next month, and we highly encourage you to participate in that. We've made several improvements to the survey that will make it much easier to fill out, and we'll be sending out more information in the coming weeks, so be on the lookout for that. It doesn't look like we have any other questions that have come up, so I do want to say that Jeff's presentation had a lot of links in it. We will have this posted on the website, so if you want to go and look at the slides and click through the links and look at some of those organizations that he referenced, it'll be sitting up there for you to do that. So with that, finally, we'd like you to please save the date for our next webinar, which is on Wednesday, July 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern, when Daniel Powell from the City of Los Angeles will be discussing methods for using metrics and data-driven procedures to improve retirement outcomes for plan participants. So it should be a good matchup with the benchmarking information that we should be getting around that time. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So again, thank you so much, Jeff. We appreciate all of your work on this presentation, and it was fantastic. And to all of the rest of you, have a great day.